With having said that, I'd like to introduce Brenda Hudson, who's going to be doing our first presentation. One thing to note, Kevin Tharp was also supposed to aid her in this, and he is unable to be with us today. So we're thankful that Brenda has just said, hey, I'll do it. So thank you.
Morning, everyone. Like Joe said, I was doing this as part of a presentation with someone else. I'm not going to present Kevin's slides. I would not do them justice. Luckily, if you know me, or maybe you don't know me, I have no problem talking. So I am just going to treat this a little organically, and I'm going to leave time for questions so that you guys can feel free to ask those. So just a little bit about me. Brenda Hudson. I work for the Indiana Clinical and Translational Sciences Institute. I have been with them since the beginning. Prior to that, I was with endocrinology, general internal medicine. I was even at Regenstrief when I started my career. I've been recruiting participants into research studies for over 25 years. So I've been doing this a while. Hopefully I don't look as old as I feel most days, but so this, talking about REDCap, I use REDCap a lot, have been using it since the beginning. It's a great tool, especially for recruitment and obtaining data. So I'm just gonna tell you a little bit about how I use it, some cool tricks. The conversation I'm gonna have today assumes that you already know how to use REDCap. If you're new to REDCap, don't worry about it, because once you kind of learn some of the key things, then you'll be like, oh, now I know what Brenda was talking about. We'll kind of go back and try that. So anyway, let's move on. All right, so, okay, so I feel like I need to talk like this. So I'm gonna move this over here since the slide thing's over there. So the first thing I want to talk about is when you're doing a survey, how many people here usually do surveys or collect data on a regular basis? Okay, a large number of you. How many people here have used REDCap to collect data? Okay, a large number of you. Good too. If you haven't, that's okay. But one thing that I want to tell you is when you're trying to collect data, the best thing to do is to plan it ahead of time. I actually am project manager by training, so I'm always like plan. So you want to have what your objectives and goals are prior to that. You want to know what your definitions are, and you want to know what your sample size is. And that's all going to be important in how you design this, because once you know those, you can figure out like what is the best way to implement this design. You're going to create your questionnaire, and you want to make it simple and as concise as possible. I've seen lots of questionnaires where people are like, they think about it from a paper questionnaire. I want to ask these 5 things or these 5 different survey types, and they put them all in REDCap back to back, and then assume that people are going to be able to answer those or be interested in answering those. And so you need to think about, what do I really need? What do I really want? And what am I okay not getting if people don't respond? So I would put the important things up front, and maybe the things that are less important if people drop off towards the end. The other thing is to outline the structure of the questionnaire and the branching logic. So if somebody answers this way to this, what's going to happen next? I'm going to show you some examples of some things that we've done in branching that I think you guys will appreciate. You can get as complex as you want. Sometimes if I get real complex, I reach out to some of my REDCap friends that I promised I wouldn't name, at least yet. So you don't reach out to them directly, but I ask, how can I do this? Is there a different way to do this? So don't be afraid to do that with the REDCap guys, they're great. So then determine how people will be invited to complete your survey. So there's a bunch of different ways that you can invite people, right? So this is going to be my recruitment experience component for you. So a lot of people will just say, here's the link, or, oh, now I have a QR code, people can scan it, and then they can complete it. That's great, except for now people, if that's open, they can complete it more than once. If you're providing a financial incentive, that may not be good for you, because you may get a lot of garbage surveys, and we've been seeing this more and more. Unfortunately, there's a lot of bad actors, and so you want to kind of plan for how you make sure that you're getting legitimate data. And then let's see. You want to create your survey in REDCap and then including your consent information or information sheet. So you're going to want to know how you're going to consent them. The beauty of REDCap is it now has the e-consent component to it. How many people here have used that? Okay, a smaller number of people. If you haven't, it's great. Now, it's not 21 CFR Part 11 compliant. If you don't know what that is, that means you don't have to worry about it. Probably you're not doing FDA studies, but it's great for expedited or exempt studies to get signature on a consent. You can even use it as an information sheet where maybe people don't even need to sign it, but they just say, yes, they agree, and they continue on. So it's just a way to outline what are the rules for participating in this study. You know, it's voluntary. You can skip any question that you want. So you want to kind of have all that listed out. And then you want to test it first with your team. I always have somebody from my team test it so that they can give me any feedback of things I have to fix. Sometimes it's frustrating because they'll be like, well, when I did this, it did this. And you're like, oh, okay, I'll fix that. And then you want to give it to some people who are a novice to that project. So maybe they don't represent necessarily that population, but they are maybe friends or family that don't know what you're doing, that can test it and tell you if there's something wrong with it. You want to kind of have it fully vetted before you put it out, because even once you put it out, you will have some issues with it that you'll have to fix, but that's okay. You want to catch the early ones first. I even email it to myself several times just to make sure it looks the way I want it to look. And then I kind of, you know, go through it prior to even doing that or right before I pull the trigger. Oh, and just so you guys know, these slides are kind of boring at the beginning. I didn't put any pictures in them, so you're just going to have to look at them or me. So the slides might be better. So, all right. So the other things I wanted to say is when you're thinking about your questions, you want to keep it simple and concise. My background actually is in psychology. And so one of the things that we learn is how do you do assessments and how do you create questionnaires? And I find that a lot of times people make the questions really complicated and you have to think about the people that are answering them. And it's not that they're not smart, it's just that they don't know what you know or what you're trying to ask them. So you have to make sure that you make it clear what you want the response to be or what the answers are that maybe are appropriate for it. So some things that you want to think about is like font, size, color, white space. So you guys usually hear this on websites and things like that, like making sure you have enough white space between things so that people can easily read it. Because even though it's on a computer or, you know, think about it, some people are probably reading this on their phone. You want to make sure that they can read it, see it appropriately, pick the right choice. The one thing that I do like about REDCap is you have the ability, if you haven't tried it, to switch to this kind of larger view. One of the examples I'm going to give you will show you that, where you can have the buttons larger, which I think is great for visual folks. The other thing too, you know, I have color, and a lot of times I see people using red. You know, you want to make sure that you are, you know, isn't like rules necessarily in REDCap about making sure you're disability friendly, but you want to think about those types of things. So people that have certain color blindness or things like that. So maybe red might not be the best choice. Like you could use red, but just make sure it's larger or bolder or things like that. So just take those things into consideration. Okay, leading or loaded questions. You'll see this from time to time, and I find sometimes you don't know that you're doing this. So I think there's ones that are very explicit that you're doing it and some that you don't. So one that I found for a leading question, which I thought was kind of interesting, was how short do you think Napoleon was, right? So I'm already telling you that he's short without really, you know, and so you're going to answer based on that. But if I said, how tall was Napoleon? You know, that isn't leading, right? I'm just asking you for the height. Now you might already think that he's short and maybe he was, or maybe he wasn't, but I'm not leading you with that kind of component. So you want to kind of think about that. And then a loaded question is when you think about those, you want to make sure that you're not forcing people to choose something. So if I said something like, is your favorite color blue or green? Well, my favorite color might be orange and it's not blue or green, but my only choices are blue or green. Well, so now how do I answer that, right? So that's kind of a loaded question. You're not really giving me the opportunity to really choose what I should choose from there. The other thing you shouldn't do is you shouldn't have two questions in one question. So a perfect example I saw when I was looking around was like, do you feel that the pay and the benefits that you receive is fair? Well, I might think my pay is not fair, but my benefits are pretty good. Or I might think my pay is pretty good, but my benefits stink. So how am I supposed to respond to that, right? Now, how you can fix that is by giving them choices like, my pay is good, but my benefits stink. My benefits are good, but my pay stinks. Both of them stink, or both of them are great, right? So that might be a way to kind of fix that. But if you don't have that kind of component or think about it that way, you may be leading people. And so the responses that you're getting sometimes aren't appropriate. And you can see this sometimes, I think, when people interpret survey results, and you're like, I don't think that's what people meant when they said that, but the way the question was written, it forced people to respond a certain way. So think about that when you're creating your questions, see if you're getting the responses that you thought. And a way to do that is asking people to complete it, and then kind of do a little kind of debrief with some of those folks and say, why did you answer that way to that question? And see if they understood what you were asking. So just some things to think about. Don't use absolutes. So now sometimes this is appropriate. You want to know it's either this or this. But if you force people to do that and you don't give them an out, then they may just quit. And so you want to sometimes give them the ability. So one of the things when you're sending things to the IRB is you usually tell people they can refuse to answer any question that's in this survey. Well, what I find sometimes that people do is they'll make a question required, and then they don't give people an out. So how do I then skip that question and not answer it when you haven't given me the ability to do that? Now, you may still want to make that required so that people respond to it, but you need to give them the response. So I always add a choose not to answer response in there so that they can answer that way within it. Then I code it, like if you're coding things, 1, 2, 3, 4, I always code it the same way through all of my surveys. So, did not respond is usually a 99, something like that. I know Biostats is talking earlier. I'd be really interested in how they kind of code their information on the back end. But that's the other thing I would say that I don't have in my slides is when you're coding these and you're providing answer choices and you're using numbers, be consistent across all of your surveys, how you do it. Kind of think about a plan and have your team always using that way. That way you can interpret those things appropriately across time. So you'll always know that a 99 is a choose not to answer, and a 0 is a no, and a 1 is a yes. I don't know, how many people knew that, like from a coding standpoint? Okay, all my coders were like, yeah. So if you use the yes, no questions in REDCap, yes will always come up 1 and no will come up 0. And that's a great way to think about that. Now, gender is a little different. And gender, usually it was, I think 1 was male and 2 was female. I don't know how they've changed it now with the additional genders in there if there's certain coding, but usually when you see that type of coding, they'll try to keep that consistent across like all surveys. So think about that as you're going through there. Make sure to give persons, okay, I already told that one. And then use closed-ended questions whenever possible. So give them the ability to respond. If you have a lot of open-ended where people have to type a lot, people won't, and then they'll stop and they'll just keep skipping those. So you want to think about that. So if there's a couple open-ended that you have that you want them to respond to, just keep those brief and minimal, and then kind of choose a couple key ones that you really want them to respond to. I usually leave one at the end that says, is there anything else you would like us to know? And so that kind of allows people to say something. Most people do not say anything, but every once in a while you get something in there that's really helpful. And so that's one way to kind of capture additional information. Okay, so just to summarize, keep it simple and concise when you can. Design survey for people to be able to read it easily. Instructions should be clear and responses should be consistent. And what I mean by that is like if you're using, let's say you have a question where you're saying very satisfied to not satisfied. that's your things. You don't want to switch it up later and change it to something different than that. So then it's just like satisfied or not satisfied. Keep it consistent throughout so people know how to respond. When you're designing surveys, sometimes they'll tell you to flip it. So sometimes you'll say satisfied first, and then you'll say not satisfied next time to see if people are paying attention. But if you do that, just be sure that people are aware and kind of catching that. I think in virtual surveys, it's a lot harder to kind of get people to respond that way versus a phone survey where you're talking, or an interview where you're talking with folks. So just be aware that if you do that, I would again test that to make sure people understood that. And then you want to kind of put instructions in front of each thing, real simple instructions to say, the next set of questions we're going to talk about, we're going to use this, we're going to change this up, and we're going to use it this way. So people may still not read it, which usually is the case, but at least you have it there. And then provide compensation for completion. But what I would say to this is, because we are seeing more, I would say, I don't want to call them scammers, but people really trying to just complete surveys to get money. I wouldn't set it up so that they complete it and then they get paid. Because while that might seem a good way to do it and you want to pay them as soon as possible, you got a lot of those bad actors, and now you're paying for those folks and you're spending a lot of money, and people will realize that and they will scam you for that. I mean, I was just talking to an investigator the other day who was talking that they got, like, they had sent something out through social media, had 900 responses. A large portion of them were not legitimate responses because there's bots and there's people who constantly set up extra accounts to kind of game the system. So there are those things out there. A lot of what I invite people to do is to not have people go directly to your survey and complete it, or if you do, that's their screener part, and then you invite them to the second part. So that way that you can actually look through those responses and make sure you're inviting the right people. It doesn't mean that you won't necessarily still have some of those bad actors in there, but you're minimizing them. So you want to kind of think about your strategy for that. Okay, so now it's going to become the fun part. I'm going to walk you through some things. So I'm going to go step over to the computer to do that. And what I wanted to show you was ways to actually invite people to complete surveys other than just giving them the link. So I didn't know if people were interested in that. I do this all the time. I find it a nicer way to kind of set up a survey. So we're going to kind of go through that, and then I'll show you some other things that I thought maybe you were interested in. So does that sound okay to everybody? All right.
Not helpful.
Andy's one of my buddies. We've known each other for a long time, right, Andy? Oh, see, all right. There we go. All right, so here's my survey test project. And like I said, when you are creating a survey and you go into your project setup, I had to mark that that this was I'm using a survey on this project. So you want to make sure that first off, that's the first thing you got to do. It has to be marked as a survey. Now, just because you have it marked as a survey doesn't mean everything within that project has to be a survey, because you can enable and not enable certain things, which you'll see, which is what I've done, but you at least have to have surveys enabled to do this. And then, so the other thing that you have is this thing over here. Once you enable that, you can get to this survey distribution tools. And if you go here, as you guys can see, and probably you're all familiar with, here's your public survey URL right here, which you can copy and put into components. I love that they added this, so I don't have to go and create my own, that you can get your QR code to your survey here. have them enter a code, or you can generate a shortcut. We're going to enter a shortcut code. We can do that here. And then, if I hit open public survey, I already have the reCAPTCHA on here. It's always great to have on. It still doesn't stop most people, but at least it stops probably some. So I think it's always good. And then just so you guys can see, this is my simple survey I created. Do you like summertime, right? It's my yes, no. And then here's my text. What's your favorite summertime movie? So that's what we're going to be kind of using off of. And you can create your short survey link. And so I usually like to create my customized link. And so that way people can have that. And then that's great. That one worked. I put one in yesterday. It was test. I don't know. Apparently somebody used test as a short survey. Imagine that. So that one didn't work, but summertime did because nobody's used that. So now I have my short thing that I can do. Participant list. This is what I wanted to talk with you about. This is what I love. This is my favorite thing to do. And so you can go in here and you can just add. Has anybody used this? How many people have used this? Okay. A few people. So you can just go in here and you can enter your email addresses that you want to send the survey to. Why I like this is because they get a unique link and then if they completed it, and you can set reminders up so people will kind of be reminded if they haven't done it in 4 days or whatever, it automatically gets it. If you just send people a link and you say, please complete this, then you have to send that email out again and say, if you haven't completed this, please go to this link and complete it. Well, if I've already completed it and you send me like 3 emails asking me to complete it, I'm really annoyed at this point because I've already completed it. Why do I keep getting this, right? This way it only goes to the people that you want it to go to. The other thing that's nice about this too is you can add in their piping where you can have their name. And so that it'll say, hey, Brenda, go and complete this. This will really help you out, or you should do this. And so it makes it much nicer and much more, I think, friendlier. And then people are like, oh, this is directed to me versus an email that goes out to everybody. So think about it in those ways. The other nice thing that you can do in here is I can type in, and I'm going to put this down for just a minute. Okay, so if I put a comma, so you're going to put an email address on each line. That's how they designate each one. But I can put a name after that so that I can have a name associated with that email address. And so if I do that, it says that that person's been added. So now I've been added to this. Now there's this thing I've already enabled down here called participant identifier. It's not automatically enabled. You have to go in and enable it so that you can see that BRL Hudson at iu.edu is linked with Brenda Hudson. You have to have that kind of unlinked. If you don't, and you send your product through production, because I've done this many times, Alexander and Andrew probably know, you have to ask REDCap to turn that on. And if you've already sent it out and you're like, why isn't this working? You're like, oh, darn it, I forgot to turn that on. So just something to kind of think about. It's kind of down there. You just got to kind of remember it visually. But there's another way that you can do this is a little bit different. And I'm going to show you that. But one thing to know about add participants is you can use an Excel spreadsheet to copy and paste. So if I have a line that has everybody's email addresses in it, I'm just going to copy that row and then I paste it in here and it'll put them all on their own lines. So you don't have to type a person in each one, which makes it really handy. The other thing too that you can do in Excel is if you have ever used Excel and you've been able to combine cells, like I have A and B, and then you'd use an ampersand. So A2 ampersand plus, B2, it'll put those two things together. So let's say I have name in one column and email in another column, and I want it set it up like that. I would then put in my Excel, I would create a column and I would say, okay, let's say my email address is in B2 and my name is in A2. I would then say equals B2 ampersand quotation, comma, space. Don't worry, you have to remember all this. Quotation, ampersand, A2. And then what that would do, it'll say, then when it comes up, it'll look just like I told you. It'll say email address, comma, space, name. And so then you can use that column and copy the whole thing in, and then it's in there. So just something to kind of save you guys some time. But I have a better thing for you guys. So when I created this for you, I created this thing called participant list. Okay, and as you can see, it is not enabled as a survey. And the reason being is this is my actual contact list. So what I did is I created a study ID, I put a name in here, and I put email in here. And so this is so that I can actually import information into REDCap. So you can import your information in here. And so how you do that is there is down here under applications, there is your import tool. And I'm sorry, I'm like looking in the dark. Okay, and so here's my import tool. And they give you a template, and you want to use the template. If you are working on your REDCap and you download this template, and then you go in and you make changes to your REDCap, don't use the old template you downloaded. You need a new one, and this will make more sense once I download this. All right, so we download it. When you open this up, it is going to have every field that you have in your entire project, okay? And you want it to do that because it's going to import back up to the whole thing, okay? So you want to make sure you have the most current, because if you don't and you go to upload it, it'll say, I don't know what these fields are. These fields are missing, and it won't let you upload it, and you'll get these like red error kind of thing. The other thing that you'll need to know is, and especially because like this one's nice and short, so you can see everything, but if you have one that's long, it'll kind of go all the way over. And I always tend to put this database at the very end because it's not important to anybody else other than me. So I always know that I put my database at the end. You have to have a record ID in here. So if you haven't kind of already started adding participants in there, I just kind of number these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, just give them a record ID, and that will import in there, and we'll show that. And then this is what the person's going to fill out when they get sent the screener. So I don't do anything with anything other than the other fields that I need in my database part. And then so I didn't type to 6. I wanted you guys to be able to see it, what I was doing. All right, and then the participant list complete. Here's another cool thing to kind of know if you didn't already know this. You have a data dictionary that you can download, and you can actually edit your survey in your data dictionary. I'm not going to show you that today. I don't know if Alexander's talking about that later, but that might be a whole nother conversation. But you can edit in your data dictionary, then upload your data dictionary, and then that will create forms. And sometimes that's easier if you're creating this big form. But what I want you to know is that here's your code book. And sometimes I'm like, what did I code that as? And so when we were talking about numbers like yes or no, here's our codes. 1 is yes, 0 is no. All of your, just so you know, anything that's complete is always 0, 1, and 2. So incomplete, unverified, and complete. And since I'm creating this form, these are going to be complete because I'm adding them. Now, if you don't complete them, it'll just come in red. It's not a big deal. I've done that before. It doesn't impact it. So you can kind of leave them like that if you forget. But I always put it as 2, so it'll come in as green. So we're just going to save this, and it has to be a CSV file. So something to know. And then when you come back here to your import, here we go. You go to import, and then here's this thing. It's like, choose your file. And so we're going to choose, hopefully this is in the download since it's not mine. It is, yeah, okay. Here you go. And then we're going to upload the file. Now, luckily, I should have done one wrong because then you could see, and sometimes it's a little frustrating. If you don't pull the right stuff in, it won't come in, and it'll tell you, hey, there's an error in one of your fields. And so you have to kind of figure out what it is and go back in and then fix it and bring it back. But this one uploaded correctly. And then if we go into our records view, oh, that's right, because I already named this one. Here's that field in there now. So now that has been added in, and it's ready to go. And then, so if I go back to my survey distribution tools, and I go to my participant list, I can go to compose surveys, and now I'm in here, so I can send it out to myself. So this is like where you can send those. You could either do it the way that you copy and paste, that'll totally work, or you can do it and you can send it straight from this component. But what you have to do, which I didn't show you how to do yet, is you have to go to project setup. And there's this thing right here that says designate an email field. And you have to mark this as email. And that is because, and I'm sorry that I'm jumping around here because I forgot to show you this part. If you go into email, it's just a text field, right? But you have to validate it as email. If I don't validate it as email, it won't show up in that email. It doesn't know that it's an email unless I validate it. If I have more than like one email in there, that's fine. They'll all show up there if I validated them as email, and then you just pick the one that you want to have it sent to. Okay, so go back to project setup. We just designate email. We're going to enable this. We're going to hit save. All right, there we go. And now if I go back to survey distribution tools and I go to participant list, now I have all of the people that I already had added in my list that I can now send a survey to. So I don't have to like copy and paste them in now. They're already in there. And then you can like actually edit this. You can put something in there, like if their first thing is complete, you can say, don't send it to anyone who's already completed this. If you've uploaded new ones, things like that. But that's an easy way to actually send that. And then when you compose your survey, you can actually change this. As you can see with me, I have 2 emails that validates, but let's say I want to send it from the CTSI. I can send it from the CTSI email. Now I have to have the CTSI email say, yes, I can send it from there, but it will show up. And so when it comes through people's email, it'll say CTSI. So I might not want it to come from Brenda Hudson because then people will respond back to Brenda Hudson. I might not want them to do that. I want them to respond to who I think it's coming from. So I want it to come from InHealth or CTSI. And so I can change that. So that's where it looks like it's coming from, and then they'll respond back to. And then other key things is you need these 2 things here. Keep these in here. These are like the links that the people get. If you copy and paste your text in there that you want for your email that goes to people, then make sure you leave these at the bottom or, incorporate them in there, because otherwise they won't be able, they'll get an email, but they won't have a link for the survey. Okay. The other thing I would do if you do this is, because it's connected to that particular person, I always put a thing on this, like this, see how this says, this link is unique to you and do not forward it on to others. I bold that. I'm like, if you want to invite someone, please have them email us or something like that, because what we had on one project, once we did this is learned from our mistakes, is we sent it out and people were interested and they shared the link, but we had it open for them to be able to go back in and change their responses for a couple of reasons. And so when they forwarded it, it wrote over the other person's information. And we're like, how did this happen? Because the consent is different than the person's name and all this other kind of stuff. And here, that's how we figured it out, was that, oh, they went and they forwarded it, even though we said don't forward it, and they wrote over it. So kind of keep those things in mind when you're doing that and try to remind people of that. Okay, any questions on that part? That was a lot, or maybe not. Maybe you guys don't care, but it's okay. But something to think about. Okay, so go back to the slides. All right, okay, here we go. All right, so we talked about emailing participants. We talked about editing data dictionary and using the code book. We talked about import tool. Have you guys used piping at all? Yeah, it's like, yeah, piping's great, right? If you haven't used piping, piping is great. All piping is you get somebody's response and you can take that response and then you can add it into the question. So even I use piping even on those emails. So where I put my name, I would put name in bracket, and then it would pipe my name. So say, hey, Brenda Hudson, why don't you fill out this survey? So that's, if you don't want like people's full names or you want it a certain way, just make sure you have it, because if you pipe it in, it's going to be exactly like you have it into that part. And then calculations are great too. So I'm going to go back to my here. I want to get back to here. We'll just go back here. It'll open back up. All right. So if we go back into my designer, I have some examples in here. I'm at Project Home, distribution tools. There we go. Open public survey. All right. So yes. So now that we have this done, JAWS. Okay, so that's my thank you for taking this survey. You can put whatever you want here. You can have it go to them. You can do things like that. All right. All right, let's go back into designer. All right, so what I did here is I wanted to show you some e-consent examples that I thought you would be interested in. So here's one that we did. This is a simple information sheet. They did not have to sign this. So it was basically they had participated in our AstraZeneca vaccine study, and we had wanted to see, these are some folks who didn't actually participate, and we wanted to have interviews with them to see whether or not, what was their reasoning for not participating, what can we glean from that. And so they basically, you can see where there's piping right here. It's not piping because I didn't invite myself to this, but it would have the person's name. And so this is the first part of the consent. So, you know, you might have taken part in this study. If you choose to participate, here's what would happen. You'll be emailed. So this is like simple. So they're not at this point consenting to the study. They're just consenting to be invited to it, and then they'll consent to the study afterwards. So I say, yep, I'd like to take part in that. And then I go to the next page. And the first thing is like, what contact information can we contact you at? And then phone number. Oh, all right, sorry. See, I put a validation in there. And so now I'm stuck having to actually put a somewhat real one in there. Okay. And there we go. All right. Oh, see, this is what you get. All right. All right. How many is that? Everybody, let's see. One more. Okay. There we go. Yay. All right. And then we put in here, when would you like to be invited to that? And so, yeah, you can invite me here, morning. And then here's my famous, is there anything else you'd like us to know? You know, no. All right. So, and then we submit it. And then once they submit it, then they get to the consent. So that's how we set this one particularly up. You don't have to set it up that way, but I always have it set up in my consents or in any of my projects. I explain what's kind of going on, and then I ask them, are you interested in pursuing learning more about this or consenting or being part? And if they say yes, then I send them on to the consent. I don't have the consent in the first thing for them. I want to make sure that they want to kind of hear more. They get a little bit of information, and then they go into the consent. And then as you can see, what we did is we made this larger text. So we have instructions up here, right? Nobody's probably reading. And then we go, because this is bigger, right? This is what draws your eye in. And so we have all the information here for the consent. And what we did is we broke it up. So we made it, we didn't put everything so it's one page and they just scroll all the way down. Because even if you're not doing a 21-page consent, even a 2-page consent is long to read, especially some of the terminology within there. So we made sure that we broke up the key elements in there, what they have to do. I'm going to show you an example of another one where we put bullet points into what they have to do, which is also helpful. And then I know Chris Hobbick, who I saw over there, is going to be talking about Indiana Biobank. We've done a lot of cool things with the Indiana Biobank consent that I'm going to show an example of. To kind of help people read it. Now, you don't know, like if they're reading it, you hope they are, you're providing information for them to read it, but all you can do is give them it, make it simple as possible, and then assume that they're reading what they should be reading. And then, you know, again, it keeps going, so they have to read through, and they have to page through, and then here's the contact information, they'll be paid. And then we get here, it says, you know, you're reading this information, would you like to take part in this study? Yes, maybe, but I'd like to get to answer my questions first. So if they do this, they provide their information, And then an email alert goes, and I think somebody's going to talk about alerts later today. An email alert will go to the person who's supposed to respond and will respond back to that person or no. And so if they go to yes, they go to the next page, and then they fill out their information within here. And so this is one of the things I talked about, putting the more sensitive stuff towards the end. We always put the demographics at the end to ask people, like, would you be willing to complete that? And then we have our prefer not to answer responses in here. And then NIH has kind of gone to this finally. We've been doing this for a while where we allow people to choose more than one response. I don't like having people have to choose like one race or even have to, choose a race. They can choose other as well. So they can choose multiple or other, and that's completely acceptable. So let's see. Oh, see, I didn't answer. Would you agree? Yep.
Why are there pluses next to some of them and not others?
Oh, okay. So,
Please repeat the question.
yeah, sorry. The question was, why are there pluses next to some of them and not to others? Because this is that you can answer more than one. And so when I was talking about having that nice look to things where like it's bigger, that's this look. I don't know, Alexander, what's that called? There's a name for it. Enhanced. Yeah, enhanced button. So it's in where you go to the survey components where you can change that. That's where that's at. And so you can do that. So great question. And then, all right. So, and then you can see where it says must provide, right? So there, and then we'll put today's date. And submit. All right. And so then here's our thing. Thank you for moving the information. If you agree to participate, you'll receive a call from our study team. If you said you still have questions, someone from our team will reach out to you. Have a wonderful day. So, just something simple and concise. All right. How am I doing on time? What do I got, guys? 20 minutes. All right. Good. We're good. All right. Any other questions on that part? Yeah.
What's your standard font size? Like, like a lot of the taxes, you've got smaller stuff where people
Oh, that's a great question. What's the standard font size we're using for like consents and surveys and things like that? Generally, like this is enhanced. I can't remember if we made this bigger or not. I think we did. The reason why I'm struggling a little bit, and maybe we can go in and look that one up, is because they use points in the REDCap because it's an HTML, and usually I have to play with it a little bit so that, because sometimes I think I have the right size and it's not quite the right size because it's smaller than I think it's going to be. And so you kind of have to play with the HTML in there. The enhance will make it a little bit bigger. I think we actually made that much bigger than what it would normally would be within there. So it's a great question, although I'm not answering it really well. I apologize for that. So, but I think that what I showed you right there was we had a lot of older people that was participating, so that's why it was larger. I probably wouldn't normally have it that large. A little bit smaller would probably be better. If I'm thinking of it from a word standpoint, I probably would use at least 14, from a word standpoint. So if you can get that equivalent, 12 would be okay, but it is much smaller. I wouldn't go 10. I mean, that's way too small for people to read, and then they won't read it. They'll just kind of scan through. So, all right. So go back. I'm going to have like 50 tabs open here for Joe afterwards. Okay. So then we're going to go in here back to my designer, my e-consent. All right. So we talked about the SOTO. Tactic was a study that we were doing that this was at the beginning of the pandemic. And we were trying to find people who had not had COVID, who had not been exposed to COVID, to participate in a testing. So they had to live in Marion County and specific zip codes, and they had to agree to be able to be swabbed. And then we were sending those swabs off. So this is like very, very beginning. This is like April 2020. So, so we created this, and our first thing was, our screener. So they had to be screened first before you even provide them. So they were already, these people were in our volunteer registry, so they were known to us. We sorted them based on where they lived, and then we sent an email message out to them asking them to participate. And so exactly what I told you, what we did before, where we added their information in and sent them an email, we did it straight through REDCap. Everything was done through REDCap so they can get a reminder. This is the project that I found out that you have to make sure that you, we had to turn the consent back on because somebody hadn't signed it right. And so we had to have them re-sign it. And doing that, somebody had written over somebody else's. So this is the project that we learned that valuable lesson. So, and then we just had to have them both re-sign a consent. So anyway, so as you can see, these buttons are, enhanced. And then we also put different questions. We didn't put all the questions on one page. We made them go through it. So the first question was, they had to live in Marion County. And so we made this so that it was branching logic. So it only viewed once you answered. If I said no to this and I submitted it, they would say you're not eligible, but we don't want to do that yet. So yes, we live in Marion County. And then we had all the zip codes that we wanted in here. So you had to pick one. And then, has anyone in your household been diagnosed with COVID? So if you have to say no in order to get through. Has anybody around anybody with COVID? No. And then here's our little pluses again. You couldn't have any of these things. So if you had any of these things, you weren't eligible again. So you really want none of these symptoms. Now, if you haven't done this, you can have these where you have people can choose more than one. And then you have a response that says none of these symptoms. You don't want somebody to be able to check none of these symptoms and still check these. So there is actually language that you can put in the coding that says you can pick all of these except for if they pick this one. If they pick this one, they can only pick one. And that's in the coding in the question part. And we can, if we have time, I can go in and show you how to do that. And so then we submit it. And so now I'm eligible. And so now I get into the consent again. So here's our consent. Now, what was cool about this consent, so as you can see, this one's a little bit smaller font than the one previously. So we wanted to make sure that people understood what was going to happen if they participated in the study. So to take part in the study, you'll get a test kit, you're going to get a swab, you're going to get a tube, you're going to bag the tube. So this is everything that you're going to get. And we delivered these to people's houses. So that was the other thing. We had to deliver them. They swabbed themselves. They had to put it back outside their house. And then we had to take it and then deliver it back and then send it to the lab. So this is like, here are the steps for taking part in the study. And what we don't have in here, which we did create for when we dropped off, is how to actually collect the sample. Because at the time, this was new, right? Like you got to swab your nose. Here's how you got to do it. We've all done it, so we know how fun that is. But we had to kind of explain this to people because they hadn't done it. So we actually had someone from our design team actually create a flyer on how to do that. We could have, in theory, put that in here. REDCap works really well with putting pictures in things, which I'm going to show you on the other consent, which is great. So they can kind of go through here. And then here where you can see, even though I said red's not great, but we made sure that people can understand yes and no were highlighted. And then if they said yes, I wish you could just hit yes and then we'd go to the next page. I always hate having to have people have to respond down there. That's the one thing for REDCap I wish they would fix. One of the many. But so REDCap's great, but there's a couple things I would love changed in it. But so then you could put your name in here, and then here's where we have our signature, right? So people can sign on their computer or their phone. And then the date, okay? And then because there's a household survey, I'm not gonna tell you what my real age is, so I'm gonna pretend like I'm 25. And then female, what's your race? We can pick, these, what's your cell phone number? I counted that time, so I know. All right. All right. So, and then we have address. Luckily, it doesn't know that that's not really an address. It will probably, I probably made this. Is anyone in your hope would like to participate? So when we did this, if we said yes, oh, see, I actually had that. See, I'm smarter than I thought when I, whoops, sorry, wrong thing. When I created this. Okay. So if they said yes, then they got this drop down and we can say adults or kids. And then, so I can pick as many as I want here. And then what'll happen when you go here, I see, it didn't like the city that I put in here. Can't spell caramel. It's hard to do one-hand typing. I don't know how kids do it. Okay, next page. All right, so then it'll ask how many, and if I say 2, it'll ask me for 2 people. If I say 3, it'll give me 3. So that was the cool thing that we did. And because the other thing is that we put their name in, and then we would put their email address, and it would send the consent to those folks. And then we could track whether those people completed the consent or not. So when we knew how many kids we had to drop off, so there's 5 people, we had 5 kids we had to drop off. We knew who each person the kid had to go to because they were labeled appropriately. And we knew whether they needed to have a consent and whether their consent was signed or not. Yes.
Did it actually create new records for each of those, or did you have to do that yourself behind the scenes?
Okay, so we didn't create new records. So the the question was, did we create new records for each person that was added? And what we did is no, they were all under one record. So it was a household. So that household was the record. And so, but there might be 5 people in that record. And so we would know how many people were in there. And then we would have the results for each person in there as well. So basically, if you look on the back end, there's tons of like surveys or, databases within there. So we can have all that information. So it would have person 1, person 2, person 3, person 4. So we would have that information, but it was only for one project. And the reason why we did that was because it was easier for us to know that we had to go to one house and there was 5 people at that one house than to know that we had 5 people and then connect them somehow into that household and kind of do it. And then we would have all those consents in a sense, because if they were 14 to 17, we had to have an assent for them. They needed to sign that as well. So we couldn't give them a kit for that assent unless they were signed. So any other questions on that? It's just a cool project. If you guys are interested in that, it got kind of complicated. It was fun to build. I built this. Yes, Catherine.
Could you show the skip logic for when you typed in like number of adults and then
Oh.
how many fields populated?
Yeah, we're gonna go, we'll go in here.
What was that for?
Sorry, she wanted to see the skip logic for how many adults, how you did this. So yes, so don't laugh. I wanted to say when Joe was showing how many projects, I think there's 1,000 in my thing here. So just so you know. All right. All right, so here's, we're gonna go to designer. And so as I was saying, like, here's all the different components in here. These are the different consents that got sent. Here's our assents, because usually we would only have 2 per household generally that were in here. Well, actually we had more, we had 5, but in my test copy, I only put 2. All right, so in our consent, if we go in here to the consent, go down to, all right, here we go. So how many other adults who live in your home want to participate? So if they put this here, then we have under here the questions, right? So this says if this equals 1 under other participants, this is the one that shows up, okay? This one says that if it's, so this is kind of how we did it, if this makes sense. So you would have to kind of, let's go into that logic here. We'll go this real quick and then I'll get to the next one. So here's the logic. Participant status adults equals 1, okay? And other participants equals 1. So they had to say that they wanted another person to participate and the age of other participants equals 1, okay? So that's what happened for that one. But to get to the second one to show up, it says that it has to be greater than or equal to 2. Okay, so if they said 2, then the second one showed up, and then the next one was 3. So they only showed up. So basically, we just took that one, copied it, and then changed the branching logic for it. And then we figured that 5 per, we wouldn't have more than 5 adults per household, we would hope. So that's how we kind of limited it. All right, and with a couple more minutes, I just want to show you another. Let's go back to our test. All right, designer, e-consent. I'll show one more, and then this is just the biobank. This is why I just want to show you that how you can use a visual component to it. So we actually had a visual consent created for this project. The other thing too is like just something to know, the IRB at IU is awesome. And if anybody's here from the IRB, you are awesome. So please pat yourself on the back. But we worked with the IRB for this particular project to create a consent that was easy for people to read and that was more pictorial and that people can understand. So it's a biobank, which doesn't seem complicated, right? You're giving a sample, it's matched to your medical records, and you're in there for perpetuity, right? Or until you say you don't want to any longer be in there. But kind of trying to explain that to folks, you know, in a busy clinic setting and how this was, we're like, we really want to visually be able to show folks to do that. So we worked with the design team, we worked with the IRB was part of this. The actual thing that became more complicated was not the consent language, was the HIPAA language. So because we were one of the first to do the combined HIPAA consent together. And the one part that I'll show you that looks like there's all this gobbledygook is like this stuff here. This is all HIPAA stuff. Like it's like, so as you can see, like we had to add all this stuff in here. And normally I wouldn't like this scrolling this much or this smaller, but these are actually images in here versus actually having that component. And then again, on the last page, we have, here's the key things that you need to know. And then are you willing to participate? And if they say yes, then you go in here and then you get to the consent part so that they can consent. Now we did this in person. We now do it online during COVID. We actually email the consent to folks. So we talk with them and then we send it and they can do it themselves. But at the time we had this in here so that they would hand it back and then we can have a witness sign it. When you're sending it, emailing it to them, there isn't a witness signature on that when it comes back. So, and then real quick with my, well, you know what? I'm just going to allow are there any questions before I show you one last thing? Does anybody have anything I can answer? Okay. I just want to show you how to hide responses. And the reason why this is useful is, so when you're creating a database and you're doing something over time and a response might change, you can't go in and delete that response. So for example, when we were doing the vaccine study, we were actually using REDCap in a way that it was not designed to do, which was having people schedule appointments to come in. So I had a list of appointments and then people could choose it. Only one person can choose that appointment. And then, so then they would sign up for it. And, but as you can imagine, when that appointment was no longer available or that it was like in the past, I didn't want it to show up anymore because people can't choose it. I needed to hide it. And so I can't remember, Andy, if you were working with me on this. It got really complicated. No, Alexander, were you helping? Somebody was helping me, but it got complicated because if you imagine, we were doing this for months. So we kept like having to hide dates within the system because REDCap does not have a way to schedule within it. That's one thing I wanted to add. So if we have any pull, anybody kind of get that and their ability to schedule things. But so we had to hide them. And I just wanted to show you, this is a database that I use for my research assistants where they go in and tell me how much time they spend on a particular study. And so as you can imagine, some studies, they come and go. So we don't need everything listed all the time. So we hide choices within here that we are no longer using. And so this is the kind of the code to do it. You have hide choice, and then basically you're using whatever the code is. We code it as an abbreviation so we know what it is, and then you're just going to use that code. It's just like code, comma, you know, the other code, comma, so it's always commas within there. And then when they go in to add something, and I'll show you this here real quick. So this is what this looks like. So as you can see, all these are on here, but if I go in and I go to add a record, and I go here and I pick today's date and project specific, and I have to say that this is a special collection because it shows up on these special collections. Not all those choices show up. So a bunch of them are hidden because they're not, I no longer use them. If you delete them, what'll happen is you'll mess up the data and they'll get this nasty message that says, we don't think you can do that. And we're the kind of blocking any changes that you're going to make. And I'm sure it's Alexander that gets it, that says, hey, should they be making this change or not? But you don't really want to do that because it messes with your data. So you want to just hide it. You can also do that with questions. If a question is no longer relevant for you, you can hide the question instead of deleting it because you don't want to delete it. You want that old data still to be in your database. So, yes, question.
Early on in your talk, you talked about demographics.
Mm-hmm.
And at the end of the survey, personal information, for example,
Okay, sure. So the question was, why would you put your demographics at the end? Okay. Well, one is, so part of it that I didn't kind of get to, which we would have talked about with Kevin was here, is the difference between virtual surveys and phone surveys. You in a virtual survey have no rapport with the person. You're sending it to them. They don't know who you are. They might know kind of who you are, but that might not matter. So demographic information, especially if you're asking about, race, if you're asking about salary or those types of things, they're a little more sensitive questions. You want to put those at the back. So that way you can have people answer your questions that you want to answer. And while that's important to you, you want to know that. If you don't get it, you want the other information more so than demographic. So that's kind of why you would do that. It's just, and that seems to be the case for a lot of ways that survey design is done, is to collect that information at the end. Any other questions? I know my time is up. So if you have any other questions, come see me. And thank you guys for your time. And sorry that it was kind of organic.